and I am here representing the Highland Park Parent Education Committee. Welcome to Change How You Feed Your Family, featuring Robyn O'Brien and Leake. I would like to kindly ask that you silence your cell phones, and I'd like to give an enormous thank you to Wendy Crispin with Wendy Crispin Caterers, the Hotel Lumen, Mommy Mixer, and all of you who made a donation during online registration for making this event possible. And I'm going to ask that you please consider making a donation of any amount so that we can continue to have programs of this caliber. We will collect completed surveys and donations during Q&A and as you exit. So for those of you who do not know me, or for those of you that do know me, I should say, I am passionate when I come across something I strongly believe in. I first learned about an increase in children with food allergies 7 years ago when I took a tour of Wesley Prep. The director, Linda Altig, said to the group, "I don't know what's changed or happening, but we are seeing more and more children with food allergies every year, and you need to be aware of it." Fast forward 3 years, the topic came up again at Westminster's Mother's Day Out program. Our teacher mentioned that she had recently heard a woman on NPR discussing children with food allergies, and she ordered the book that was referenced on the program. The teacher shared it with me, and I stayed up way too late every night for a week while nursing my 4-month-old, reading it. That book was The Unhealthy Truth by Robyn O'Brien. Robyn O'Brien is a Fulbright scholar. She graduated top woman in her class in business school. She worked as a Wall Street food analyst. She's an author, and she's a mother of 4. Her work has appeared on CNN, The Today Show, Good Morning America, Fox News, and she's given 2 TEDx talks. She's called Food's Erin Brockovich by the New York Times. I quote Graydon Carter, editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair. Robyn O'Brien's message describes the toxic tangle of American food, government, and culture. The unhealthy truth is a healthy dose of medicine that we all need to swallow. So with that, I present Robyn O'Brien.
Well, thanks you guys for coming out this morning. I just have to say, it means such a lot to see all of these faces here. I'm from Houston, Texas. I was born and raised there. I have family in Dallas. And the first time I came to speak in Dallas was at the Barnes & Noble for Highland Park, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really small. And I was really nervous. And the probably 10 people that were there, we were all really nervous. People weren't really talking about this yet. And as I stood in front of them, we were trying to get this thing going, and this beautiful girl walked in. And she was bald, and she had this scarf around her head. And she sat right in the front row. And she said, "My name is Dana, and I'm 29, and I have breast cancer. And my family doesn't understand why I care about this so much, so that's why I'm here." And that is forever going to be part of my story. It's forever going to be part of Dallas to me. So thank you so, so much for being here today, because I do understand how valuable your time is and how much this means to so many of us. If anybody had said I'd be standing in front of you guys talking about this, I would have said they were totally nuts. As Janelle mentioned, I was born and raised in Houston, the oldest of 4 kids in a really conservative family. I ran track, and on our long runs, we used to go to a friend's house and eat Twinkies and drink Diet Coke. I was not a foodie. I was super academic. I learned pretty early on that I could channel all of this kind of firstborn type A energy into school. And so I went to business school on a full scholarship, and I graduated as the top woman in my class. I was recruited by Enron and by Exxon. but I knew that I tend to get bored pretty easily, so I went to work as an equity analyst because I got to cover a whole bunch of different industries and meet a whole bunch of different management teams. And we did. You know, we met Martha Stewart when she was taking her company public. We met Goldman Sachs when they were going public. It was an awesome job. Except the one problem I had with it is that I was the only woman on the team, and so the guys made me cover the food industry. I couldn't cook. I burnt noodles. I really had no interest in covering the food industry, but I was the low guy on the totem pole, so I did. And we had the management team of Whole Foods come through our offices. There was Wild Oats and Whole Foods at the time. And they ordered these veggie subs. You know, and we kind of thought, this is Texas, you know? And we had plenty to say about it, but we thought that they had carved out this nice little marketing niche. So we invested in that. And then when my husband and I decided to have kids, he had a job offer in Colorado. And so when our first child was 8 weeks old, we left Houston and we moved to Colorado. And I traded the briefcase for a diaper bag and threw myself into motherhood with all that same type A energy. And we had 4 kids in just over 5 years. And really, as any mom knows, at that point, I didn't want anybody telling me what to eat. I did not want them telling me how to feed my kids. It is hard enough to just get children to eat. And then one morning in January of 2006, my whole life changed. As I was feeding the kids breakfast that morning, which were Lego My Eggo waffles, tubes of blue yogurt, and scrambled eggs, our littlest started to get fussy. And she was cranky, and I thought, I'm just going to put her down for a nap. So I scooped her up out of the high chair, took her upstairs, and put her down. And she's our 4th kid. To this day, I do not know what made me go check on her. I always just left her to nap. But for whatever reason that day, I went upstairs to check on her. And her face was swollen shut. And as I scooped her up out of the crib, I was absolutely terrified. And I turned to the older 3 and I said, did you guys put something in her face? And they all gave me these blank little kid stares where you know they're telling the truth. And I got so scared and I called the pediatrician and she said, you need to get to the hospital. I raced her to the hospital and they're trying to calm whatever was happening to her, which at this point I did not know. And she said, what did you feed the kids for breakfast? And I said, well, waffles and blue yogurt and scrambled eggs. And she said, Robyn, she's having an allergic reaction. And she starts rattling off these statistics about food allergies and how kids are allergic to food. And all I could think in my brain was, since when? We all grew up with PB&J's, a carton of milk on every lunchroom table. We didn't have these food allergies. What is happening? And how am I going to do my job as a mother? How can I feed my child if she is allergic to food? And so as we got everything calmed down and I came home that day, I put all the kids down for a nap, and every single type A analytical gene in my body went off because I did not understand what was happening. And I knew that this was an emotionally charged topic, and I wanted to see the data because I knew numbers would tell a story by itself. And as I poured myself into that, what I learned in early 2006 was jaw-dropping. I was learning that 1 in 3 American children now has allergies, autism, ADHD, or asthma. This generation of children has earned the title of Generation RX. At that point in time in 2006, I learned that 1 out of 17 kids under the age of 3 had a food allergy. All I could think was, since when? Since when? As I continued to look at this data, I learned from the Centers for Disease Control that cancer is now the leading cause of death by disease in children in the United States under the age of 15. I have 4 children. All I could think as I was learning this data are, what are my odds? The autism rates were skyrocketing. I was learning how military families were the hardest hit. And I couldn't unlearn any of it. As I looked at the data, particularly as it related to allergies and asthma and autism and how sometimes those are connected, a kid with allergies will also have asthma, these numbers to me were absolutely jaw-dropping. And there were these moments where I just was frozen. I was frozen. But also as a mother, you know that paralysis just isn't an option. And as I continued to dig through this, all I could think was, what has changed? Because we didn't deal with this when we were kids. We didn't have to worry about a friend's EpiPen. The moms weren't worrying about PB&Js. It's what we ate for lunch. And to me, it just begged this question, what has changed? And as I continued to sort of dig into food allergies, in the summer of 2006, as I was researching, out popped a study that was being conducted at a small school in Michigan. And the EPA had issued a grant for $400,000 to this researcher in Michigan. And the title of the article was, "Do Genetically Engineered Foods Cause Food Allergies?" So I'm thinking, what's a genetically engineered food? And as I started looking at that, I learned that in the 1990s, it was a brilliant business model. The analyst in me absolutely saw it as this absolutely brilliant business model. In the 1990s, there was an increasingly growing concern over the spraying of all the chemicals that they were pouring on the fields on our food crops. And so using a new technology, scientists were basically able to genetically engineer these insecticides into the plants themselves. And therefore they could claim that they're not spraying the fields anymore, then you don't have to worry about all that environmental damage. We have hardwired the corn so that it can produce its own insecticide. And I looked at that and I thought, how did we not know this? And as I started going down this list of the top 8 allergens, milk, soy, I wondered, are these genetically engineered foods? And how have I never heard about this? And so the first genetically engineered food that was introduced was an artificial growth hormone that's inserted into our cows to help them make more milk. And again, the analyst in me says, that's smart, that's a great business model. You're helping cows make more milk, that makes it more affordable to all of us. Who can get in front of that? But then what I went on to learn was shocking. I learned that the United States was the only developed country in the world to allow this artificial growth hormone to be pumped into our dairy cows. And while the industry was telling us it helped produce more milk, it was also causing inflammatory conditions in those animals. Mastitis, ovarian cysts, all kinds of skin diseases that resulted in an increased use in antibiotics on those dairy cows. And it was for that reason that every other developed country around the world said, we don't want that in our milk supply. We don't want it in our ice cream, we don't want it in our cheese, and we don't want it in our milk. When it came up for a vote again, studies were showing that it also elevated hormone levels that were linked to breast, prostate, and colon cancer. And countries around the world again said, no thank you, we don't want that in our dairy. And when I looked at that data that showed these elevated hormone levels linked to breast, prostate, and colon cancer, there was a night where I was feeding our littlest her sippy cup. And all I could think was, how many sippy cups have I put this milk into? And how many bowls of cereal have I poured it on, not knowing that every other developed country around the world said no. And honestly, for probably a few days, I sat on that. I don't think I wanted to know what our rates of cancer were here versus the rest of the world. But I had a responsibility to these kids, and I thought, I have to know. And as I turned to the American Cancer Society, Livestrong, I learned that the U.S. has one of the highest rates of cancer of any country on the planet. It is the leading cause of death by disease in American children. And I also learned that only 1 out of 10 cancers are genetic, which means 9 out of 10 of them are non-genetic or have an environmental trigger. And as I learned that about the milk, I thought, okay, what about the soy? In 1996, using this new technology, scientists were able to engineer the soybean so that it could withstand increasing doses of their weed killers. And again, it is such a smart business model if you're a chemical company. These chemical companies hardwired that soybean seed so that they could absolutely saturate it with more of their chemicals, and I got it, those revenue lines, I get it. It's a brilliant business model. The one study that was conducted, the human health study, showed a 50% increase in the rates of soy allergies in the UK. And for that reason, countries around the world said, again, we don't want that in our food supply, or if you're going to put it there, you're going to label it so that we can make an informed choice. And as I kept going down this list and then went on to learn about this corn that had been engineered so that it could produce its own insecticide, I thought, how have we not been told this? Because we know to rinse those vegetables, we know to wash the veggies. But that corn, because of this change being so fundamentally different, that corn was patented by the chemical companies, and that corn is now regulated by the EPA as a pesticide. And as I learned all of this, there were some really hard, dark nights in our house. I can remember one day looking out in the backyard at the 4 kids playing in the backyard, and I didn't want to do it. I did not want to do this. I didn't want to have to stand on the stage and talk about it. It challenged everything I believed in. But I looked at them that day and I thought, I can't unlearn this. And if parents around the world have been told, American parents deserve to know too. And as I continued to drill through this data, I'm an analyst, so I knew correlation wasn't causation. But I also was seeing all kinds of data and all kinds of statistics about how this is impacting our families, how this is impacting our schools, and how this is impacting our economy. Breast cancer rates, 1 in 8 women are expected to get breast cancer. And yet only 1 in 10 of those cases are genetic, which means that we can do a lot to exercise precaution and to begin to prevent these diseases. As I was coming through a lot of this research, the President's Cancer Panel issued a report a couple of years ago. And the numbers are that 41% of us are expected to get cancer in our lifetime. That's 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women. When I learned that, I thought, there is something in me that is so fiercely patriotic. I am far too proud of an American to want to see this to happen. And I thought, we have this opportunity right now, all of us, to change this legacy. And as I began to really look into what was happening with our food, and I did not want to. I did not want to. Everything in the kitchen was mac and cheese and blue yogurt and dino nuggets. And as we started reading those labels, I realized, here I had been totally schooled, MBA, totally schooled, and I was completely illiterate when it came to the food supply. I had no idea. I just figured if it was on the shelves, it was fine. And as we started to learn what was in our food supply, we realized that this list, these ingredients, that artificial growth hormone, these genetically engineered ingredients, this high fructose corn syrup, all these things have been added to our food since we were kids. They're not used in foods in other countries. Our American corporations formulate their products differently. So moms and dads and eaters and kids in other countries get a different box. Where our stuff is full of all of these artificial ingredients, which I get it, the business model, you use those artificial synthetic ingredients because they're cheaper and it helps drive revenue and margins. But these same companies, Coca-Cola, Kellogg, Walmart, Kraft, they formulate their products differently for eaters in other countries, and they don't use these ingredients. They use the real ingredients, the kind that we ate when we were kids. And 64 countries around the world label these genetically engineered ingredients because no long-term human health studies have ever been conducted. And we don't know what the impact of these ingredients might be on a little boy with autism, on a pregnant mom, on somebody with Alzheimer's. We have no idea what the long-term impact of these ingredients might be. And for that reason, 64 countries around the world label them, and 27 countries around the world completely opted out. So, the skeptic in me was saying correlation's not causation. But as I looked at this data and the skyrocketing increases in the number of children with cancer and the number of children with allergies, I thought correlation merits investigation. And I had to kind of go with this wide-angle lens. As I started to really look at the way we were handling these crises in our country, it was pretty stunning. The New England Journal of Medicine, there were oncologists that were writing articles saying that if we don't address the runaway rates of cancer in this country, it will bankrupt our healthcare system. 41% of us are expected to get cancer in our lifetime. They estimate the cost of care at $100,000 a year right now, currently. And 90% of those cases could be prevented. And as I looked at this, I thought, what is the impact that this is having on our economy? Again, it's this fierce patriotic American thing where I thought, if we're so busy managing disease, how are we putting our best foot forward in the global marketplace? How are we going to produce the smartest, best products and technologies if our corporations are so busy managing disease? And I learned that for 18 cents of every dollar that we spend in our economy, 18 cents of it is spent on healthcare costs and disease management, which means that we can't put that towards other things like education or anything else that we believe in, innovation, entrepreneurship, none of that. It's getting so tied up in managing disease. And if you look at it, it's by a lot compared to these other countries. And I thought, we are so much smarter than this. Once we know it, we are so much smarter than this. As I continued to look at the data, there were other sources that I wanted to turn to. Again, I come from such a conservative family, so I was turning to sources like the USDA, the CIA, the EPA, and I learned from the CIA that they rank life expectancy at birth. And as I was, looking for the U.S. on this list, I'm scrolling down and I'm kind of thinking like, we're going to be at the top, 5 maybe, maybe there's some European countries that are better than us, but we'll be in the top 10. And I keep scrolling down and I'm scrolling past like Bosnia and Korea and all of these countries. And at the time that I first made this slide, we ranked 50th. I had to update it because now we rank 51st. And again, that was just almost so impossible to believe. But when a child is born in the United States today, their life expectancy is shorter than 50 other countries around the world. And as I was kind of coming through this, and I'm thinking all this stuff is going into our food, and people around the world knew about it, and they said, we don't know if this is going to be linked to cancer, we don't know if this is going to be linked to allergies, so we're going to opt out. And people kept saying, well, Robyn, that's easy. All you have to do is buy organic, and that, to be totally honest, was annoying at first, because I thought, organic food is so expensive, and I sort of had this notion that it was just this kind of marketing niche, and people were saying you should go buy organic, so I thought, well, why is this so expensive? I want to understand this business model. If the chemical industry has hardwired these seeds and they're selling all these products and they've got this whole operating system, what's going on in the organic industry? And that's when I learned that by law, that USDA organic symbol is actually a legal standard that those food companies have to adhere to. And it means that by law, that list of additives is not allowed in the production of those products. And so all of a sudden I was looking at it and I'm thinking this is actually a legal standard that's going to ensure that these things are free from these additives. And I wanted to know why it cost so much more. And so I kind of started looking into that model, and it was fascinating because all of us as Americans, as taxpayers, all of those taxes that we pay into our national budget, if you think about us as one big family sitting around the dinner table, that's our big family food budget. And what's happening is that the farmers that embrace this new way of growing food with all these chemicals just introduced in the last 15 years, those are the farmers that are getting all of the financial support. They get marketing support, they get all these insurance programs. And then the farmers over here, that are growing things without this new operating system, without all of these chemical inputs, they're charged fees to prove that their stuff is safe. They're then charged fees to label it. They don't get the marketing support, and they don't get those insurance programs. So their whole cost of production to grow things organically is higher. And our system is structured in a way that it doesn't support this way of agriculture. And as I learned that, I thought, there is not an American I know that wouldn't want at least a level playing field, so that we could have access to these foods at the same cost that we've got access to these foods. So that the choice here becomes one that every single American can afford to make. And to me, it really at that point almost became a human rights issue, because I thought, how have countries around the world placed a higher value on the lives of their children by giving access to every single parent at a fair price to these foods? And as I began to look at this, I realized, this notion I had of organic was wrong. There was incredible demand that was starting to happen in the marketplace. And it meant that it was produced without any of these ingredients. It was happening across the board. We were realizing that there were all kinds of ways that we could manage our health, And again, like looking at this from a business mind, I thought there is enormous opportunity for people to get in here, get involved, create solutions, and become part of this change. One of the fastest growing categories in the grocery store today are products that do not contain these genetically engineered ingredients. You can find them when you buy USDA organic stuff, but you can also find them with the certification that's pretty new called the Non-GMO Project. It is now estimated that 30% of the foods on our grocery store shelves will be GMO-free by 2017. That's only 4 years away. And what is so incredibly inspiring to watch is that even while the industry's kind of sitting on its thumbs, the government's sort of saying, we have these industry-funded studies, they tell us that it's safe, they don't have the financial muscle to conduct their own studies. The market is responding to consumer demand, and as a growing number of us are concerned about the health of our families and trying to eat cleaner food, the market is responding. Chipotle is labeling genetically engineered ingredients in their food. Safeway has just introduced a product line that is free from GMOs. And Target is rolling out a product line that won't contain these ingredients. So as I was struggling through all of this, I realized that when you ask somebody to think about changing the way they eat, it's a much bigger ask. It changes more than how you navigate the grocery store. I realized that we have all inherited a food system that worked. It worked for our grandparents and it worked for our parents. But the landscape of health has changed so hard and so fast that this system we've inherited doesn't really work for us anymore. And so I thought, I don't want to spend much more time looking back, focusing on this train wreck. I would so much rather look forward and let's figure out how we can create the solutions on this landscape that's in front of us. And I thought, there's so many examples of technologies as they evolve. This genetically engineered technology that they're using on our food right now, it's new. It's new. It's patented. USDA, recognizes it for its novelty. It's patented. And just as we had new technologies, for example, with IBM, with that very first computer, it was this huge, monstrous computer in one room. If we had stopped there, we never would have gotten to where we are today with the efficiencies and the effectiveness in computers and in technology. The same thing can happen here with the food supply. We have brilliant minds. We have access to the internet and to technologies that we did not have 10 years ago. And there are ways to get involved and to create extraordinary change. And I think the best example of that is probably the fax machine. Like when that first came out, that was novel, that was new, that helped us do these incredible things we've never done before, But now when you look at the internet and email and social media, it's pretty obsolete. And I think that's what we can do. We can take this on the spectrum and recognize that there are enormous opportunities for innovation in this food space. Venture capitalists are getting behind it. I think this part is so exciting. They recognize that this landscape of health is changing so hard and so fast. Those cancer rates are absolutely stunning. The allergy rates, CNN is estimating that it costs $4,200 a year to manage a child with food allergies. The rates of EpiPen sales for the pharmaceutical companies are skyrocketing, but there are other opportunities, and companies are starting to recognize that. In the last couple of years, because of this business background of mine, I've been approached by a lot of these corporations, and they are fascinating. They are full of parents, just like you and just like me. And some of them are the organic ones, and they were founded by people that knew this 30 years ago. But I've also heard from these big food companies, the really, really big ones. And one of those CEOs had me come out and speak to his employees. And he loved food, and he loved his company, and he loved his 3 kids. And I said, you know, what are you afraid of? And he said, my board of directors. And I said, well, you need the political coverage too. And I said, how do we make this so love-inspired that they can't help but get out of the way and recognize that this is our generation's legacy to leave behind for our kids? And I think a great example of that is Annie's, which make the little cheddar bunnies. They took the old mac and cheese model and they cleaned it up. And it was started by a mom whose kids loved mac and cheese. And she thought, I want to give it to them, I just don't want to have all this junk in it. And so she reformulated the mac and cheese to be made without the junk. And when Annie's did their IPO last year, it had the biggest opening day gain of any IPO in almost a year, which meant that Wall Street got the most excited over this technology than anything they had seen in almost a year. There are so many entrepreneurs that are getting involved. What people are realizing is that these externalized costs that are coming out of the junk food industry become the revenue opportunity of somebody else. You have incredible entrepreneurs here in Dallas. You have Hail Mary, you have the Gem, you have these amazing people who are recognizing that there is so much that we can do to restore the health of our families. So then that kind of leaves you like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Thankfully, with you guys, you are an extraordinary audience. You have extraordinary resources and talents and educations and abilities. And I think that when you leverage what you are passionate about, with what you are good at, with that skill set, you can create extraordinary change. And the opportunity in front of us is absolutely enormous. And I truly believe that this is a legacy that we can create and build and leave for our children. So that when they say, you know, what did you guys do when you realized that our food was full of all these ingredients? We can just say we built a better food system. And so for me, I had to rethink organic. My grandmother lives in Louisiana, and she's 102 tomorrow. So she gets this on a really fundamental level. But I realized that, you know, as we were adding all these additives into our food supply, all of a sudden, in the 1990s, that's when we had to kind of come up with this adjective organic to label the food that didn't have it. And around the world, instead of calling it organic food, they just call it food, and they label the genetically engineered stuff. That's the new stuff. So I began to kind of go down this list, and I thought, you know, I can't do everything. You have this moment of paralysis where I'm looking in the kitchen and I'm thinking, this stuff is in everything I feed my kids. What am I going to do? Because if I don't give them that mac and cheese, there's going to be mutiny at the kitchen table. And so, completely honestly, that very first night, I took out that box of mac and cheese, and instead of using the whole packet of fluorescent orange powder, I used half. And they didn't know, and I knew, and I thought, I can do this. I'm going to take these baby steps, and that's how I'm going to get it done. And we went at that pace, and I thought, you know, you don't potty train a kid overnight, you don't wean them from a sippy cup overnight. This is not going to happen overnight, but we're going to start to make these changes slowly. One of the first things that I wanted out was that artificial growth hormone. I wanted that out of our milk. And thankfully, you can go to Walmart, you can go to Sam's, you can go to Harris Teeter, you can go to Piggly Wiggly, Kroger, Safeway, and you can find milk that's labeled RBGH free. And it means that that artificial growth hormone was not used in its production. And as you know, as we continue to kind of slowly make our way through this list, the artificial dyes that Kellogg and Kraft and Nestle and all these companies don't use in kids' products overseas because they're linked to hyperactivity, I thought, I think I'm gonna try that. I got 4 kids, and I got 2 little boys that kind of don't come down off the ceiling sometimes, you know, so how can I try to do this? And again, you know, when we took away that blue yogurt, and I put white yogurt on the table, the kids were like, Mom, it's white. It's white. And we added sprinkles, and then we kind of weaned that, and we added chocolate chips or granola or raisins, and we went at it at a pace that we could process it as a family. This is the data on organic today. A growing number of Americans are simply realizing that we have all these ingredients in our food that weren't there when we were kids. And while we have to use this adjective organic to describe it now, it's really just the food that we ate as kids, and people are trying to get back to that norm. So as we move through, and this was hard for me to do, honestly, because I am type A, but it really was in everything we ate. And my whole kitchen was to really focus on progress, not perfection. And to realize you couldn't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Food is an incredibly loaded issue. It's family, it's economic, it's financial, it's social. There is so much to food. And it is not one size fits all. Especially today, given the health conditions that we're seeing in our families. The 1 in 3 kids with allergies, autism, ADHD, or asthma, the stunning rates of cancer, the fact that the CDC is now reporting that 1 in 3 Caucasian kids born in the year 2000, which is this year's 8th graders, 1 in 3 of those Caucasian kids and 1 in 2 minorities are expected to be insulin dependent by the time they reach adulthood. And so we've inherited this food system, and we've inherited these cookbooks, but we're realizing that so much has changed, that we have to give ourselves the ability to focus on progress, not perfection. I think one of the most important things to do before you do anything, before you clean out your kitchen or do anything, is to find a friend who you can lean into as you begin to make these changes, because you'll need a buddy, you need that support system. When I was coming through this, people said, you know, you really should reach out to Erin Brockovich. This sounds like Erin Brockovich. And all I could think was, I'm this mother of 4 out in Colorado now. How do I reach out to Erin Brockovich? But I'm super type A, and I thought, you know, I have to at least try. And so I spent probably 2 weeks crafting a 4-sentence email to Erin Brockovich. I really wish I was kidding, but I really didn't. And I sent it off, and I don't know if I expected her to respond, but I knew I had to try. And it was a few days after Christmas, that first year, where she replied, and I was up late at night working, and I read it to my husband, and she said, I am so glad someone has finally taken this on. When my brother was 37 years old, I lost him to a food allergic reaction. Still, the fact that happened that day shifted how I thought. And I thought, you know, maybe one person really can make a difference. You do not know whose life you're going to touch. You have no idea how this is going to ripple through. But I truly believe that this is one of the most patriotic things that we could be doing right now, is to restore the health of our families and help protect the health of our children. So I'll leave you with this, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. I know we're going to take questions after Lisa's section, and I look forward to talking with you afterwards.
Thank you, Robyn. So Lisa Leake of 100 Days of Real Food comes to us from Charlotte, North Carolina. Lisa had always been a Cheetos girl until she saw Michael Pollan on Oprah 4 years ago. After that episode, she challenged herself to feed her family of 4 nothing processed for 100 days on a weekly budget of $125. 3.5 years ago, I was fan number 8,000. Lisa now has over 570,000 fans on Facebook and over 35,000 fans on Pinterest. Lisa is an international internet sensation, and with that, I present Lisa.
I hope I can live up to that. I'm a mother, a wife, a foodie, a blogger, soon-to-be author, and sometimes public speaker. So I'll do my best after Robyn. She's such a professional, and she's just amazing. Thank you for that. So I'm excited to share my story today. Just over 3 years ago, here's actually a picture of my family, my husband and 2 daughters. We were just like any other suburban family. I thought I was making healthy choices, but come to find out I had a wake-up call one night when I was watching Oprah, and Michael Pollan was the guest. And I went on to read his book, In Defense of Food. I recommend it. And here's another good one, Food Rules. Definitely 2 great reads. And the topic of the show was, where does our food come from? And I thought, gosh, I really have no idea. This could be a problem. So I went on to read his book, where I learned a lot of what I thought were the healthy choices were actually highly processed. And just what the food industry was telling me were healthy choices. You know the labels on the front, low fat, lowers your cholesterol, all that good stuff. Just as a side note, you should ignore all of those claims on the front. So I had a new understanding of where food comes from, and realized that he called all those foods that were, like Robyn said, covered in my kitchen, all over my kitchen, he calls those food-like substances. So again, a big wake-up call. So I decided I just had to do something about this. I just felt compelled to not only make a change with my own family, but to try to influence others to do the same, because I felt like, just like Robyn had said, I didn't realize this was happening, and I knew there were others that probably felt the same. So I wanted to make a change in a way to get this message out to others. So one night I said to my husband, what if we took a pledge and we go 100 days with no processed food at all, just to prove that this could be done? Thankfully, my family doesn't think I'm crazy, and they stuck with me, because a lot of people did think this was a very crazy idea at the time. And so we developed some rules that I'll go over in a minute, and decided to document our journey online along the way. And to be honest, at first I wasn't sure if this was a good idea. To restrict my children, I remember about a week and a half into the pledge, we were made a stop to run an errand, and somebody at the store offered my daughter a donut. And my daughter, who's 5 at the time, loves donuts. That's like, her most favorite treat. And so I wasn't even sure how I was going to handle it. And it was right before lunchtime. So I said, well, we're about to have lunch, and remember we agreed we're not going to, I was going to actually reward them at the end with a trip to the amusement park. I'm just going to be fully honest here. So remember we agreed we're going to do this pledge, and we're going to go to Carowinds when we're done, and it won't last that long. And I was really second guessing if this was a good decision. I didn't want them to end up in therapy as adults. So anyway, I stuck to it. And then a few weeks later, we were at the ice skating rink, and they have a concession stand there. And my daughter was thirsty, and we're standing in line for water, and I thought, please don't ask me for anything, please don't ask me for anything. I just, you're not in the mood for the argument. And so then she pointed out and said, look, Mom, there's a plate of fruit. They have apples and bananas. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I've not only taught her to want, to see, but to also want the only whole food at this whole place with, all the standard junk you could imagine. So I thought, no, I'm doing the right thing. The whole point of the pledge was just to gain a new perspective. I don't think anyone should live by strict rules for life, and we don't. We're more flexible now, but it really did help us gain a new perspective. And so now the website, which is right there, 100daysrealfood.com, is a lot more than just a pledge. That was 3 years ago, and here I am, obviously still going strong. I have tons of recipes and resources and tips and school lunch ideas on the blog. I still have a lot to say, and The blog has grown tremendously. Janelle shared some of the numbers, but we have over 1 million unique readers a month, and it's just way more than I ever expected it could be. And also, I'm coming out with a book in January. It'll be a complete guidebook and cookbook with over 100 recipes out in January. So it's amazing. I'm so happy that you guys are here. You're obviously interested in this topic, but this is really a growing topic, a growing movement, and I'm just excited to be a part of it. So, luckily, real food is convincing, because when I first told family and friends that we were going to do this, I mentioned they thought I was crazy. And the other thing is, they said, aren't you going to starve? What are you going to eat? And some of you may be thinking that, especially when I share our rules in a minute. But the thing is, once we figured out how to do this, I couldn't believe some of the changes in our health. And that was not really my initial goal. I wasn't trying to fix any kind of health problems. But my youngest daughter, who's not here for me to embarrass her, she struggled with constipation. And a lot of kids do. A lot of kids are on medication for this, like Miralax and other drugs. Within 5 days of changing her diet, it was like a switch had flipped. I will spare you the details, but it was dramatic. I couldn't believe it, because again, it was not a goal. This same daughter also has asthma, and the previous year, she had suffered from 5 incidents of wheezing, and then as soon as we changed our diet, she went a whole year with no wheezing at all. And I know some kids grow out of it, but again, kind of dramatic. And now she maybe has an incident of wheezing about once a year. So I think that's a pretty good change. Also, the whole family we have had decrease in sicknesses. So my older daughter was actually home from school yesterday because she had a fever. And I said to my husband, I think this is her first sick day ever. She's in 3rd grade. Since she was 2 years old and started preschool, that was her first sick day ever. So I think she's probably just, that way in general, but I'm sure that, again, the diet probably helps. My husband and I, he lost like almost 10 pounds, I lost a couple pounds. I mean, the point is we didn't gain weight, because part of eating real food is eating, drinking the whole milk and the whole milk yogurt and none of the low-fat stuff. So I think some people worry about that, and it's really not a big concern. Also, this was the most surprising change for me. Your good cholesterol, your HDL, the number that you want to be high, mine went up by 50%. And then that's when I said, I didn't eat that bad before, because, we didn't drive through all the time, or really much at all. We didn't order pizza. I couldn't believe this change. So this basically, my HDL level is so high now that it completely cancels out a negative risk factor like smoking, for example. So my doctor was pretty shocked too. Oh, I think I might have hit something. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. Also, I have more energy. So, that afternoon slump, everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? I hardly ever get that anymore, and it's great because I have a lot to do. So I really like that aspect, just feeling more energetic. And then another just side benefit, my husband and I both experienced a change in palate. So when you eat the processed food now, it's like we can kind of taste the chemical additives. It doesn't even taste that good anymore, and so it makes it a lot easier to avoid that stuff. Because people will say to me, oh, you can't have this Oreo, and I would say, you don't understand, I don't even want it anymore. So, and all of this has to make you wonder, what other underlying changes are taking place with all these things that none of which I expected. So, like Robyn said, so much disease is related to the food that we're eating, and actually there's a quote from Michael Pollan, 4 of the top 10 diseases that kill us all, coronary heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and stroke, are all directly related to the industrialization of food. I mean, it's scary stuff. And so for me, it was like, once I saw this, there was just no going back. So sorry, I'm holding too many things. Okay, so let's talk about the rules. These are the rules that we came up with on that one night where we thought of our 100-day pledge. So what you can eat, if you're following our guidelines, and this is just how we define real food. Whole food, so that's anything that's like one ingredient or has no ingredients, like that banana or apple at the grocery store. Fruits and vegetables, preferably organic, with a lot of this, obviously. Dairy products, as I mentioned, that's whole milk, dairy products, so different than I know what a lot of us are used to. Also 100% whole grain products. This can be kind of tricky, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Seafood is totally fine. I do prefer wild caught over farm raised, just because you know the fish have been in their natural environment. Some snacks, dried fruit, seeds, nuts. For sweeteners, honey and pure maple syrup, that's it, no sugar. And so that was one of the things when we were done with our 100-day pledge, I was like, wow, we went 100 days with no sugar and we are totally fine. Because I didn't think you could do it, you know? For animal, like meat products, we choose locally raised. So that way you can ask the farmer, you can go to your farmer's market and say, what kind of environment are these animals raised in, and make sure that they're humanely raised and fed a proper diet. Just a little side note, cows, for example, they're designed by evolution to eat grass. But all these factory farms, they're feeding them corn because it makes them bigger and fatter, and then they have to give them the antibiotics because it also makes them sick. And cows, they're supposed to eat grass. And so the healthier the animal is, the more nutritious their products are for you. So it makes a really big difference. For beverages, milk, coffee, natural juices, and I guess I should put water on there. I think that's a given. And then beer and wine, only in moderation, always, because we had to keep our sanity as we were doing this. But beer and wine, I mean, they are traditional foods, so that's not really too much of a stretch. And so then what you have to avoid, refined grains. So no white flour, no white rice, no refined sweeteners, so that includes the sugar, the white sugar, brown sugar, corn syrup, cane juice, brown rice syrup. It's under so many names, and also no artificial sweeteners as well. And then this is a big one, nothing out of a package with more than 5 ingredients. And again, it is possible. And no deep fried foods, because oftentimes they're deep fried in refined oils like canola oil and vegetable oil. And no fast food, not even the salad from McDonald's, because guess what? I want to vote with my dollars, and that's not where I want to go. So none of that stuff. So this may sound restrictive, but I do just want to point out, and these are all like foods that we've made and pictures I've taken with my phone mostly. This is all real food. This is some of what we eat. And on my blog, I share, or actually on my Facebook page, I share my kids' school lunches every day, almost every day. So it's not as restrictive as it sounds. But I do want to take a minute. Let me put this down. I want to show you guys some examples of foods that you might see in the grocery store that you think are healthy. And it is very tricky. It's very treacherous out there. So this stuff is not real food. So Special K, and again, the labels on the front, lose up to 6 pounds in 2 weeks. The thing is, when you look at the ingredient label, which by the way is the only way to know what's in your food and how processed it is to read the ingredient label. If you forget everything I say, just remember that. So if you look at it, the first ingredient is rice. And back to the whole grains. Rice, if it just says rice, what they mean is white rice. That's refined. A whole grain rice product is going to have a color like brown rice or black rice. So this is basically just refined grains. And then this is actually an old box I've had for a while. It had high fructose corn syrup in it. But the word got out. We don't want that anymore. So now Special K has sugar. Is it really that different? I mean, they're both refined sweeteners. So what you're eating here is refined grains covered in some sort of refined sweetener. And I guarantee you'll be starving 2 hours later because it's not going to fill you up. So that's just one example. I guess I'll stick on breakfast. And don't worry, I'll show you good stuff in a minute. I don't want it to all be a downer. But this is Quaker. They're seriously one of the worst offenders. Have you looked at them, Robyn? They're pretty bad. So I hate to say it because this seems like a wholesome, I mean, oats are whole grain. No matter if it's steel cut oats, rolled oats, quick cooking oats, oats are always whole grain. So that's good, I'll give them that. But if you look at this, okay, the strawberries and cream, it doesn't even contain strawberries. It is dried apple pieces with artificial strawberry flavoring and red dye. Thank you, Quaker. So you just have to be very careful. I know we've already talked about macaroni and cheese a little bit. I don't know if any of you saw, I was in the news earlier this year with a petition asking Kraft to remove the artificial dyes from their macaroni and cheese because all the ones marketed towards children have yellow number 5 and yellow number 6. and the reason why artificial dyes make me so mad is because they provide no value whatsoever. All they do is give it a different color. It doesn't change the flavor. It doesn't add any nutritional value. It does pose risk. They're completely unnecessary. So anyway, just remember that about Kraft. And I do want to say, yes, Annie's is a better choice. I know we talked about that. But this box of Annie's, if you look at the first ingredient, it says organic wheat shell pasta. And that's confusing because our society has nicknamed whole wheat as wheat. But unless it has the word whole, it is not whole wheat. White flour comes from the wheat plant. So white flour and whole wheat flour, it's all wheat. So because this says organic wheat shell pasta, because you don't see the word whole there, this is refined grains. This is better because it doesn't have artificial dyes and some of the other junk. But I'll show you in a minute. There is actually one box of Annie's that is whole wheat and organic. And it just, picking up that one different box, I think can make such a difference, and maybe your kids won't notice. Some other examples. Yoplait yogurt. Did anyone have this for breakfast this morning? It's okay. I used to eat all of this stuff, I promise. I did not know a while ago. So, okay, the first ingredient is cultured, pasteurized, grade A, non-fat milk. That's okay. Second ingredient, high fructose corn syrup. It does have strawberries, that's good, but it also has artificial dye. Again, this ingredient that, you know, we're just not sure about, that other countries are removing from their products, like the macaroni. You go overseas, they don't have the artificial dye in there. Same with the Nutri-Grain bars, like Robyn already pointed out. This also has artificial dye. You just have got to read the ingredients. Now, this is another Kraft product. I hate to be picking on them so much, but they make it so easy. So this is Lunchables, and I mean, I know at my kids' lunchroom, I see these all the time. I used to buy them for my kids. I even actually have a picture of them eating Lunchables that I found. The thing is, if you look at the ingredients, so this is a turkey and cheddar flatbread sandwich. This is like their with fruit variety. If you look at the one that's peanut butter and jelly with fruit, and it comes with a drink and like a fruit roll-up, how many ingredients would you think would need to be in that? Like, think if you made it at home, your bread's gonna have 5 ingredients, your jam's gonna have a few ingredients. Well, their boxed version has 85 ingredients. It's ridiculous. I mean, it really is. So I know it's fun and it's convenient and it's easy, but you do what you want with that information. 85 ingredients. Now these veggie straws, or these are veggie sticks. Gosh, if I had a quarter every time I saw a mom feeding these to their kids, I would be so rich. Okay, so it's so tricky. It has like a picture of a waterfall in the front. It really is very tricky. You're in a hurry, your kids are, you know, whining in the grocery cart, and you grab these and then you feed them and you think, okay, this is good. I gave them some vegetables today. Okay, so the first ingredient is potato flour. That's what it contains the most of in any ingredient list. The second is potato starch, and the third is oil. I called the company myself. These are deep fried in oil. Deep fried potato starch and flour in oil. What does that sound like? French fries. And so the vegetables, quote unquote vegetables, there's like more salt than spinach powder in here. It's just for coloring. It's really not gonna, so it's fine. Eat your veggie straws, just also eat real vegetables too. So that's my takeaway there. Oh, how could I forget? Uncrustables. I know it's super hard to make peanut butter and jelly, but where are the ingredients? Okay, so this has, I haven't counted recently, but it has high fructose corn syrup. It has all sorts of stuff you would not be using at home. And I actually wrote a blog post and showed everyone how to make your own Uncrustables. You can freeze your own with your own bread, and you can buy a little sealer tool like on Amazon for $5. It's really easy and it'll be worth it. You can even get your older kids to do it themselves. So that's kind of my, oh, let me not forget this, my little product description. But I don't want to just leave you with that. I want to show you, these are all things I have in my pantry and refrigerator at home. And if you want to remember this, just take a picture with your phone right now. So, Mac crackers, 100% whole grain and organic, and they're good. They sell these at Trader Joe's. They're not that expensive. This is the milk that we buy now. It's from a farm that is in Virginia. They sell it at, I shop at Earth Fare. It's very similar to Whole Foods. And it's whole milk. It's non-homogenized. Raw milk is not allowed in North Carolina. So this is what I think is the least processed milk available, and it tastes really good. I grew up on like skim milk and 2%. I was scared to drink whole milk at first. I just did it like little sips at a time, but now I realize this is like what milk is supposed to taste like, and I won't go back. The box cereal landscape is not so great. I'll be honest about that. This is kind of like one of the only cereals that, and it just, you know, it's not like bursting with flavor or anything, but it has one ingredient, which is whole wheat. And I personally, I eat granola cereal that I make. I just make like a batch every week, and I think it's really good, and it keeps me full till like 1 o'clock or even later. Organic applesauce, that's another totally safe store-bought product. Peeled snacks, they're organic, and again, one ingredient. Oh, and right above that, Lar-Bar. Get rid of all your, I used to eat those like Quaker bars, those Quaker oat bars. Get rid of all that stuff. This Lar-Bar has 2 ingredients, cashews and dried dates. And again, that is how you know how processed a food is how many ingredients. These whole grain pretzels are kind of hard to find, but these are 100% whole grain by Unique. This jam is what I buy because it doesn't even have any refined sugar, and like how Smucker's uses high fructose corn syrup, it definitely does not have that. It's actually sweetened with concentrated fruit juice, which is still a sweetener but better. And then for yogurt, I always buy plain organic whole milk and flavor it myself. And I think that's the key with yogurt, with oatmeal, with a lot of those products that are kind of ready to go, like flavored milk. It's so much better if you want it to be flavored to do it yourself, because chances are you're going to put a lot less junk in there and a lot less sweetener than the factory would do it for you. And this is the mac and cheese that I occasionally buy. That's like the babysitter night meal. It's whole wheat and organic, so I think they do have some good products, and that is one of them. So let me get back on track here. So where to start? Because hopefully you guys are inspired today to go home and make some changes. Again, read ingredient labels. I could say that until I'm blue in the face. It's so important. You want to look for, the word whole when you see wheat. You want to look for 100% whole grain. You want to look for short ingredient lists and familiar items that you can pronounce. There's really no like magic list of additives to avoid. What you should avoid are things that you would not cook with at home. It's that simple. So if you pick it up and you can't even pronounce it, that's a good sign to put it back down. Avoid the ingredients wheat and rice, because again, unless it says whole wheat or brown rice, it's not whole grain, and it's very confusing. This is actually another recommendation from Michael Pollan. Avoid sweeteners in the top 3 ingredients. So, if you see sugar, but it's way down on the list, and then you even look and see there's not that many grams of sugar, I wouldn't stress about it. And then artificial ingredients, like Robyn touched on. I, don't like to eat a lot of sugar, but I would eat white sugar over the artificial sweetener any day. So it's kind of like a big science experiment, and it's just something I personally like to avoid. And some other things you can do are just increase your consumption of whole foods. If you start eating more fruits and vegetables, chances are it can displace your potato chips or whatever else you might normally have with your lunch. Bread is good bread is hard to find, so consider some local bakeries or getting a bread machine. But honestly, I go to a local bakery. Their bread has 5 ingredients. I challenge you to go home and look at your bread. Even your whole grain bread from the grocery store probably has 30 or more or 40 ingredients. It's pretty scary, like what all that stuff is that they put in there, but real bread should only have 4 or 5 ingredients, and you can freeze bread, so if you find a bakery, you can stock up. Choose organic, shop local, avoid low fat and reduce fat, as I mentioned, and the kids menu. I think it's okay every now and then, and we do it on occasion, but if you go out to eat a lot, I would encourage you to try to avoid the kids menu, because most often it's corn dogs, pasta made with white flour, pizza made with white flour, processed chicken fingers. I know chicken fingers are in the news right now, and it's really appetizing. So I would just say order some side items. Most kids, I would say, like a baked potato or pick a vegetable they like. Try to put together some side items, or if you have more than one kid, have them share a bigger meal. Just avoiding that in general is a great place to start. We do on our blog have a place where you can sign up to take a 10-day pledge. You follow our same rules for 10 days, because if we did it for 100, you know how that goes. And also we have a whole series of mini pledges that take you through 14 weeks of cutting out one thing at a time, starting with adding more whole foods like we talked about, and then starting with beverages to make it really simple and easy. And I would say the key here with all of this is planning ahead. It is so important. If it's your night where you have soccer and gymnastics and you don't have a plan for dinner, you're going to find yourself at the drive-thru. But if you plan ahead, if you start your slow cooker, or you make double a recipe the week before and freeze it so you can defrost it tonight, that's what it's all about. We don't eat this way because it's easier, because I'm here to tell you it's not. But once you get used to it, it will become your new normal, and that's just what I do. I plan ahead now. I always know where I'm going to get the next meal from, because otherwise I'll be in trouble. And then at school, because I know this is obviously a school district coming together here, try to provide your children real food, snacks, and lunches at school, and encourage teachers and room moms to provide rewards that are not related to junk food. And again, on the blog, I have a whole list of ideas of, wear your pajamas to school day, or sit with a friend from another class at lunch. A lot of alternatives for rewards that are not candy and other junk food. Oh, I keep hitting stuff. Sorry about that. And I know a lot of you are probably sitting here and maybe you're on board, but when you go home, it's not going to be well received. I will share with you that my younger daughter, who was 3 at the time when we first made these changes, the only vegetable she would eat is frozen peas. That was it. And today, now 3 years later, because I'm always encouraging them and working on them, she will happily eat kale salad and ask for seconds. And I still am think it's just crazy. I can't believe it. The moral of the story is you are not going to change, anyone, and especially your picky eaters, overnight. It takes months or years. Just like we all worked hard as parents to potty train, and I know Robyn touched on this as well, it is hard work. I know it's easier to just give them the thing they'll eat and keep them quiet, and sometimes that's okay. But as soon as I decided to take our 100-day pledge, I also started trying a lot harder with them. And I'm always giving them foods to try, and just because they didn't like the green beans last time doesn't mean I'm not going to put it on their plate. I never say, oh, don't put that on her plate because she doesn't like it. I never ever do that. I fix foods different ways, different times of day. And one great tip on here is like a first impression. We've all heard how that can, make such a difference. So for the first impression, for zucchini, for example, give them a zucchini muffin or a zucchini bread. Call it zucchini. Don't make up some funny green name, call it what it is. And then the next time say, oh yeah, that's sauteed zucchini. Remember you loved it in that muffin. And I think that really helps. And talking about hiding food, if you do hide food, because I know we all put greens in the smoothie when they aren't looking, please do me a favor and tell them about it afterwards, so they know that vegetable is not so scary after all, and they don't grow up and go off to college and still think they've never had broccoli before because you always hid it in their pasta sauce. Don't do that. So here are some tips, and again, I created my blog to help people, so a lot of what you see here you can find. Don't feel like you have to write it all down. And I do want to leave you with some key takeaways. So again, if you forget everything that I said, I highly recommend Food Inc. The book I showed you earlier, In Defense of Food, that's great too, but this is only 90 minutes. You can watch it with your spouse, with older kids. It's so eye-opening, and it really just shows you so much that I cannot show you here. I highly recommend it. I think I've drilled this into you by now, right? Start reading ingredient labels And remember, any positive changes are better than none. Maybe start by cleaning up breakfast. And then once you've figured out how to do breakfast, then move on to lunch. Don't get so overwhelmed that you give up altogether. And I do want to leave you with one detail here. 3 years ago, before I read that book and before I started all of this, I had never once shopped at a farmer's market. I didn't even know what foods were in season. I had never once read an ingredient label, and I had never once bought anything organic, at least not on purpose. So if I can do it, I'm just as regular as the next person. I promise that you can too. Just start small and definitely use these resources and just hopefully you guys can do it. So thank you so much. So we're going to start Q&A now. There's a microphone right over here. If you guys have questions for either of us.
Hi, Susan O'Brien with Hail Mary, and thank you so much, ladies. That was such a great presentation. I've cleaned out my refrigerator pretty well. I found some Doritos the other day. I was very mad. But, anyway, the final frontier at my home is really figuring out pest control. And I'm wondering if you have any advice. I mean, the pest guy comes to my house. I hired a guy whose name, the company name is A Better Earth. And I thought, well, that's got to be better, right? But every time he comes and it's time for me to pay him, I just look at him with this distrust, like, I really, what are you putting around my house? So I stopped using them altogether, and just yesterday, a huge roach crawled across my computer. I screamed in the middle, like, it was practically the middle of the night.
Honestly, that's a hard one. I struggle with mosquitoes. They love me, and it's kind of like, do I want to put the chemicals on me, or do I want to try the natural stuff, or do I want to get West Nile virus, or do I just want to not go outside? I think there's not a perfect answer to everything, and you kind of just have to weigh all the options. I know with our pest control, I'm kind of happy with them just like spraying outside the house, and they'll always ask, do we need to come inside? And unless there's a really big issue, I don't. I mean, some things, there's really no perfect answer, unfortunately.
I had a question about the grains. It's like you were saying, when I see the package, it's so confusing how they call it. If it says wheat flour, does that mean it is whole wheat?
No,
okay.
It just means it's from the wheat plant,
Okay, so-
but it's been refined.
So unless it says 100%,
Well, it doesn't have to say 100%, but it has to have that word whole.
Whole.
So each grain, including wheat, has 3 parts: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. And what they do is they process it so you're just left with the endosperm, which is just like starch and empty calories. So it's still from the same wheat plant, but unless it says whole, it doesn't have all 3 of those parts.
so if you read the ingredient says whole wheat, you're good.
Yes.
Okay. The other question is, what are your thoughts on the other grains? I was talking with a nutritionist about something else, and she was saying that she avoids that. I mean, what are your thoughts on wheat versus quinoa? Or
Well, I think variety is great, and we were actually talking about this at dinner last night. I think some people have an issue with wheat and gluten, and they should totally avoid it. I don't think every person does. One way to know is to try cutting it out, see if you feel different. If you don't feel differently, I don't think there's any reason to avoid it. But I think variety is awesome. Quinoa and rice, and there's so many grains. And spelt, I've just recently had a love for spelt. I think all of that is great to try. Do you want to touch on that? Okay.
Hi, thank you. I found that equally wonderful and jarring. But I have a question for each of you. I remember seeing some research a couple of years ago about the red and the blue dyes in Gatorade. And my kids play football in this incredible heat, and you think you gotta give them Gatorade. But I make a compromise with them and say you can have it, but only the yellow. Is that accurate? and then another question, and you can both answer. I read a book by Jonathan Feller called Eating Animals, about the factory farming industry. And that's a lot of what you all are talking about. And he was saying that the deferred cost of a $2 McDonald's hamburger is $200 in later health care.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, in that, a book by Mark Bittman called Food Matters, he talks about that. Like, if you went out for fast food, you could leave like all your lights on and all your, electricity on and everything because the cost, the environmental cost is so high. As far as the dye, I haven't researched this differences, have you, between I just know I avoid all of them, all the colors. Do you have any?
There's a report that came out called Rainbow of Risks, and it went through each number. Blues and reds and yellows. And each one does have varying levels of significance. It's by the Center for Science and the Public Interest, and it's a resource I have listed in the back of my book for sure. But they do have varying degrees, and I think, again, it's awesome that you've taken that first step. And you're educating yourself and your family as you go, so don't knock yourself out just because of that, just keep going. And really there are some amazing resources, and again, there are some amazing companies that are coming on the market that say, hey, we got little kids that are playing sports in Texas too, we get it, we totally get it, and we're inventing these products every day. I mean, the conferences that we go to where you see these new product launches, it's extraordinary. I mean, there are parents stepping in every day saying, I need this, and nobody was making it, so I invented it, and all of a sudden they've got this huge product line in Whole Foods.
And coconut water, that's a good one too, that has electrolytes in it. Or just water. Just water.
Hi there, I'm Courtney Scott. A few years ago, my family embarked on a cleaning path, I guess is maybe how I define it. And what I find today, 3 years later, is probably my greatest frustration in Dallas is identifying restaurants where I can take my family and know that I can feed them in as clean of a manner as possible. And I don't know if there's an easy way to find out who, I can list a handful of places here in Dallas, but not very many, that provide organic produce, that grow their meats and get their meats from responsibly farms. Is there a good resource to find out about restaurants?
I think you're going about it the right way. I try to find restaurants that do source food locally. That doesn't mean all their breads are 100% whole grain, but you have to, perfection is not always the answer. Do you know that could be another invention for someone here, a directory?
I mean, we have a friend that has just introduced a juice directory, so where you can find juices around the country. I mean, these are the opportunities we're talking about. 3 years ago, she stepped into one and said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. There's an opportunity right there for somebody to say, we're going to start it locally Dallas, then get to Texas, and we're going to take it bigger. So these are the kind of innovations and opportunities that are in front of us to reinvent this thing.
Hi, I'm Sheena Wilcox. Thank you so much for your talk. I grew up in what we call in the 1970s, TV dinners and processed food. I was obese as a child and weighed 75 pounds in first grade. And as an adult, moved to Europe and the weight just came off. And it changed my lifestyle to live a lot like you guys were talking about. But two things that Robyn said made me feel a little uncomfortable, and I'd like to challenge you to just clarify some things. One was, how can we be sure that the differences in illnesses in Europe and other countries versus ours is due to genetically modified foods and not how much they walk, how well they eat, and their level of stress and obesity versus ours? And two, if we go back to farming techniques of the 1950s, can we meet the world hunger need? And what kind of innovation should we be encouraging through companies as well?
Those are great questions. One of the key arguments for the genetic modification of our food supply is that we need this technology to feed the world. That is an awesome PR spin if you're a corporation that's selling genetically modified food. The United Nations and the United States Department of Agriculture have actually both said that what we've got right now is a food waste problem. That 30% of the world's food that is produced is wasted, is thrown away. So we need a better distribution model. Will genetically modified food maybe one day serve as a tool in that toolbox to meet this need? It probably will. I think the concern right now is that we're in the new stages of this technology and we don't know if it's going to work or not. What the farmers are seeing right now is that where it was promising to reduce the use of a lot of these chemicals, it's actually resulted in more chemicals being sprayed on the crops as everything grows resistant. And so, the only way for us to know if this technology and this product is actually working is to label it. I mean, if you think about it, like, you know who makes the shirt on your back, the car that you drive, the computer that you buy, you know if there's Intel inside. We need to know what we're eating. And the only way to know if this technology is going to do everything that these guys say it's doing in their forward-looking statements to their shareholders is if it's labeled. And so, you know, to be able to say correlation is not causation, I emphasize that because there are a lot of factors that are contributing to the rates of diseases. But one of the reasons that these industries are fighting so hard to not have these products labeled, they fought it like crazy in California like last year, they're fighting it right now in Washington State. The reason that they're fighting so hard is because if that product is labeled, all of a sudden there's an accountability, there's a traceability, and there's a liability. Because we can prove that it's those products that are triggering an increase in some of these diseases. And so I think right now, you know, we're running blind in the United States. We are absolutely running blind. And the only way to ensure that you're not getting those genetically engineered ingredients the way countries around the world are is to either buy USDA organic or look for that non-GMO project certified seal. I think it is a really, really important question, and it speaks to why it is so critical that we have these things labeled.
Hi, thank you for all your information. The only thing that came to mind as I was listening to you talk about all the chemicals and everything that goes into, you know, milk and soy and all that is that I have a 3-month-old daughter that I'm feeding formula. And I just wondered if you had any advice on that, because while I understand that breast is best and all that, it just doesn't work out for everyone. So, any information?
Well, I mean, I'll just start by saying that I struggled with the same thing. My daughters wouldn't nurse as long as I wanted them to. And you were not the first person to ask us this. We've actually had conversations about it. I'll give it to Robyn.
My sister-in-law is also in that same boat too. And I have worked with companies, I have been approached by entrepreneurs that are saying we want to address this issue. The sourcing of the ingredients is phenomenally hard for them. I've also gone to some of these larger companies like Stonyfield and I've said, would you introduce a formula? And they were like, it is so logistically complicated at this point. It is one of those spaces that for whatever reason up until this point has just been impenetrable. And I think, again, it's one of those things where there's an opportunity for innovation because we do have some USDA organic certified products on the market, but again, they're not to the quality that many moms are looking for today. I think, you know, we're looking, I've asked some of the suppliers who around the world is providing the best formula. Interestingly, you know, it's in places that you would not expect, like Korea and other countries where they have an incredibly high standard that's put on production to the quality of that ingredient as it's sourced in the field to ensure that the soil that it's grown in is full of, you know, vitamins and minerals, and to ensure that the things that are applied to it would not cause harm to the developing immune system of a child. So I think it's one of those places where unfortunately the U.S. is lagging pretty big time, but it also speaks to another opportunity.
So do you think it's better to go with one of the organic formulas that is like lesser known, or to go with one of the bigger companies like, you know, an Infamil that's not organic but has been around for a long time, I guess is what I'm getting at. Because I have seen some organic formulas, but I just didn't know very much about them, so I was not real sure.
I mean, to be honest, I haven't researched like all the different options that are out there. If I were in your shoes, I would feel like organic would be a better choice. I know there's also like some recipes online. I've never tried it. I don't, you know, and that is something you'd have to consider, but I would definitely just start doing research, and I feel like organic would be a better choice, but I have not compared.
The ingredients are very sturdy in the back of that.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things, if you think about it, these brands that we are so loyal to, that we have these relationships to, that we've known for 30 or 40 years, it's almost like a boyfriend or some old, you know, like somebody you've known for so long, you know? And I think that's the challenge, is that you feel like, oh my gosh, how do I, you know, I've known Milky Way, I've known Snickers, I've known Kraft my entire life, you know, I have this relationship with this thing, you know? And you sort of feel weird. breaking that off and letting it go. It really feels weird. And so, you know, I would invite you to try it. And I think a great example of a new relationship that came on so hard and fast for all of us is with Apple. You know, like that was just, they revolutionized the way that we looked at that technology. And I would invite you to look at these younger companies that are coming up the same way. They're revolutionizing it for us.
Thanks for the information.
Thanks for your talk. My question is, I'm all on board with everything you said today at home. But my concern is at school, when I send my first grader to school every day, is she and Highland Park are lucky we hopefully get mostly good foods for the kids at school, but how about the rest of the country? And is anybody doing anything about eating at school or what the kids are eating at school? I mean, I know when I went to ask about what the kids are eating for peanut butter and jelly in Highland Park for elementary, they're eating in the festivals with high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, the problem with the National School Lunch Program, again, like when I'm looking at models, the National School Lunch Program, what's not distributed in grocery stores, what's not distributed to restaurants, what's not fed to the cows and the livestock that we eat is what ends up in our National School Lunch Program. It's kind of the garbage disposal for the food system. And as a model for that, it stinks. I mean, I really have a problem with that. And unfortunately, again, the budget these schools are given is so small that they're kind of pressured into these situations and into these contracts where they feel like they don't really have an option. And that's where it's time for all of us to get creative. I think, you know, these farm-to-table programs, these garden-to-table programs that we're starting to see in our schools, Texas is a great state for something like that because of the climate. There's so many opportunities to where we can start to supplement these national school lunch programs. And then one of my closest friends, she's in Boulder right now with all of us working on our program there, is a woman named Ann Cooper, and this is her passion. She calls herself the Renegade Lunch Lady, and she has programs in place. Districts like Highland Park could hire her to bring her down to really kind of come in and work with you guys to overhaul the food system. She calls herself Renegade Lunch Lady, and her name is Chef Ann Cooper, and I would invite you guys actually to consider her.
I have a friend who has 4 children, and she gets her milk from a local farm in Austin for them. Is that something that you would recommend?
I mean, I think that's great. In places like that, you can go visit, you can go check it out yourself. I know it may seem, you know, like Robyn was talking about, you're loyal to these companies, these big companies, you trust them, but they seem so different than what you're used to. But do you know, is it raw milk or? Yeah, raw milk, we're not allowed to have that in North Carolina, so that's not something I'm as experienced with, but I think if it's a local farm, you can go ask all your questions and make sure you feel comfortable with it.
Okay. I wasn't sure. My daughter's had problems, it seems, with milk, like an intolerance, and she's really little, so I didn't know if that would help her out. But then I don't
Some
also
people
wanna-
say, you know, again, I don't drink it, but I have heard blog readers tell me that, you know, they can't tolerate, you know, the milk you find in the grocery store, but they can with raw milk. So, you know, it might be worth trying if it's something you're comfortable with.
Okay, I am, but my husband's kind of not. That's why I was asking. I didn't know.
You know, to be honest, there's so much controversy over raw milk, and I'm kind of like, well, it's not legal in North Carolina, so I don't have to decide, you know, for my family. I think it would be a big decision if it were an option for us. So, do you drink raw milk? Oh, they don't do dairy at all. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have a couple more questions and then we'll adjourn. But as you all leave, if you have surveys, give us, we would love to accept those. And again, we're happy to accept donations to bring wonderful business like this to you. So, 2 more questions.